Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a totally fascinating framework that reveals the invisible social structures dictating human behavior. We're going to explore the profound concepts laid out in the source material, The Triangular Prison, which breaks down exactly how the systems around us shape our minds, often without us ever even realizing it.
Okay, so let's jump into this by thinking back for a second. Do you remember the very first time you noticed something just didn't quite add up when you were a kid? Maybe it was some instruction from an adult that made literally zero logical sense, or perhaps it was a huge gap between what your community preached and what you actually observed them doing. You know, you felt that contradiction long before you ever had the vocabulary to name it.
And we've absolutely all experienced this unspoken pressure. You notice a contradiction, you open your mouth to ask a perfectly reasonable question, and suddenly, bam! You feel this slight, undeniable withdrawal of warmth from your elders. The temperature in the room just drops. It's not outright anger, right? It's a quiet calibration. And in that split second, you learn the incredibly high cost of asking the wrong question, and you just learn to swallow it.
So what's really going on here? Well, this phenomenon is actually a mechanism of what is called the triangular prison. It's basically this conceptual room we are all born into, an invisible system made up of tradition, religion, and education that shapes our minds, dictates our behavior, and completely limits our inquiries right from birth. So let's just walk right into this invisible room together and take a look around.
Which brings us to Section 1, the prison you cannot see.
So how does this invisible system actually get installed in our minds? Well, it happens in 4 steps. First, you notice a contradiction. Second, you ask a question. Third, the room's temperature drops. And finally, you learn to swallow the question. I mean, this brilliantly shows how a 6-year-old learns compliance, not through physical guards or locked doors, but through an instinctual calibration of social survival. Actually, fun fact, the human brain processes social exclusion through the exact same neural pathways as physical pain. So, simply to avoid the pain of being cast out, you learn to guard yourself. Now that we know the room exists and how it polices us, let's examine the architectural blueprint of the 3 walls keeping us inside.
Moving right along to Section 2, the 3 walls.
So what are these walls? Tradition is the first one, and it basically tells you this is how our people have always done it. Religion is the second, boldly stating God has spoken, which, turns any disagreement into an act of literal damnation. And then education is the third, confidently deciding the school decides what is true. Together, these 3 walls tell you who you are, what is divine, and what is true. They are completely filtering your reality before you're even old enough to evaluate it critically.
But here's the thing we have to remember. These walls aren't inherently evil, right? They actually have a dual nature depending on how they're used. Think of it as the fire versus the ashes. When a wall acts as genuine fire, education empowers students to read past the syllabus and literally change the world. It fuels growth. But if that exact same wall is captured by power, it becomes ashes. It simply produces compliant workers who just memorize and write down the approved answer to pass an exam. The structure is the same, but the purpose has been completely corrupted. Because, as we know, bricks alone don't hold a wall together, they need mortar.
Let's dig a little deeper into this in Section 3, the mortars that bind us. The prison relies on 5 deeply human, emotional mortars to keep those walls standing straight. Memory is the community's managed story of itself, dictating exactly who the heroes and villains are. Fear is that biological terror of social exclusion we talked about earlier. Love is fascinating, really, because it starts out as protection, but slowly becomes enforcement. Hope is weaponized by selling you a deferred future to basically purchase your silence today, kind of like a lottery ticket. And finally, the inherited enemy is the group you are taught to fear before you ever even meet them. Imagine a mother in Benua warning her daughter to fear the people in the next village. She's using these raw human emotions to make her child guard herself.
And here is a truly profound paradox. Most of the people who maintain the prison love you. Seriously, your wardens aren't supervillains twirling their mustaches. They are very often your family, your community elders, and your teachers. They are genuinely trying to protect you from the terrible cost of noncompliance. But when their love is captured by the institution, it becomes the very lock on your cell door.
But wait, what happens when those first 5 mortars dry? Well, they leave behind something even more powerful, and that's shame, the 6th mortar. Shame operates entirely in the empty room. It keeps you perfectly compliant even when the institution is no longer watching, and the elders who might have judged you are long gone. It is absolutely the most durable lock of all because it requires no external guard.
You simply refuse to question things because asking would mean admitting you were complicit for all those years. Now we have to shift from the personal to the macro level and ask a pretty chilling question. What happens when these deeply human mortars are weaponized at scale?
This leads us to Section 4, the captured institution. When we trace the history of Jonestown, it reveals exactly how catastrophic a captured institution can be. Back in the 1950s, the People's Temple started out as a genuine refuge, offering soup kitchens. It was the fire. But by the 1970s, the religious wall had closed in, creating total geographic and informational isolation. And by November 1978, the institution had captured the mortar of love so completely that parents literally gave their own children poison. They genuinely believed they were keeping a final promise to protect them from a hostile outside world.
Now, bringing this down to a more everyday scale, the financial extraction of captured tradition is just staggering. 4.2 million. That is the massive amount of nairas a Nigerian family actually borrowed to throw a socially mandated, quote-unquote, befitting funeral.
Let's unpack the reality behind that massive number for a second. The deceased actually left no savings and had massive medical debts. Yet, driven by the mortar of fear and community memory, the family went and borrowed to fund that 4.2 million naira ceremony. And the devastating result? 18 months later, they literally could not pay school fees for the grandchildren. The tradition wall demands the living become poor to honor the dead. It completely confuses its loyalty, prioritizing a captured ritual over basic human survival. So, facing these massive, overwhelming structural walls, how in the world do we break out without destroying the genuine community that we absolutely still need to survive?
That brings us to Section 5. Conscious inheritance.
The solution isn't to just take a sledgehammer and tear down the walls entirely. Instead, we have to practice conscious inheritance. It's all about distinguishing between the ashes and the fire. We absolutely must reject the ashes, the financial extraction, the fear, the unquestioned compliance, the deferred hope. But we actively choose to keep the fire. Think of traditions like the Terapaga funeral support system, where the community actually pays you back to prevent financial ruin, or the early church's granaries that fed the hungry. We want to keep that genuine community care.
Which brings us to this incredibly powerful realization. Freedom is not the absence of walls, it is the examined use of them. A person with no memory, no fear, and no love isn't free, they're just empty. By consciously examining our memory, fear, love, and hope, we stop being blind participants in these systems, and we finally start choosing what we actually want to keep standing in our lives.
So if you want to practice conscious inheritance, you can actually follow these 4 steps. First, trace the origin of the belief. Then, acknowledge the genuine love behind its transmission to you. Next, honestly evaluate its actual cost today. And finally, choose to keep the fire and leave the bricks. By doing this, you are honoring the genuine love of your elders while simultaneously telling the truth about the harm their captured traditions might be causing.
Ultimately, we arrive at this beautiful truth. The fire your mother carried is real. The prison she built around it is not the fire. You are allowed to take the fire and leave the bricks. That is just such an empowering distinction, isn't it? It gives you the agency to completely reclaim your life and ask the hard questions without ever feeling like you are losing your roots or abandoning your family.
So as you look at the architecture of your own life today, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to examine. Which walls were built to protect you and which were built to contain you? Take some real time to look closely at the walls around you. Identify those invisible mortars and start choosing your own inheritance. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.